The galaxy was ruled by the ancient Jorathi Dominion, an empire so vast and powerful that no one dared to challenge its authority, stretching across countless star systems and civilizations it had conquered with cold precision. They saw themselves as the pinnacle of existence, superior in intellect and technology. Their warships gleamed with impenetrable armor and weapons that could burn entire planets to ash. And yet, despite their arrogance, there was one thing they had never considered, something they never saw coming. Humanity had been overlooked for millennia, seen as nothing more than a primitive species on a forgotten planet at the fringes of the universe. Earth was a blue-green jewel, floating in a solar system far from the centers of galactic power, a world of war and poverty, struggling to find its place among the stars. Humanity was young and brash, their technology nowhere near the level of the great empires that surrounded them, but they had something that the Jorathi never anticipated: a burning desire to survive, a tenacity that could not be measured by technology or intellect alone. And it was this very tenacity that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. On that fateful night, the disappearance of the human diplomats aboard a Jorathi flagship went unnoticed by most, but not by those who had been watching the growing tensions between Earth and the Dominion. Rumors had circulated for months, whispers of a human breakthrough in an area that could alter the balance of power of the entire galaxy, a discovery made by a small group of human scientists, led by Dar Elena Ross, a brilliant mind, whose research had delved into the lost technologies of ancient civilizations buried beneath Earth's surface. What she had found was not just an artifact, but a key, something powerful hidden in the deep caverns of a long-dead species that had once ruled a far-flung sector of the galaxy. The artifact was a weapon, but not one in the traditional sense. It was a device that could amplify the consciousness of its user, granting them abilities beyond any normal species understanding. And if Ross's research was correct, the device had been dormant for eons, waiting for the right individual to awaken its true power. With the diplomats now missing and Earth's governments scrambling to understand what had happened, it was clear that humanity had no choice but to act fast. The Jorathi were not known for their mercy, and the disappearance of their diplomats had already set in motion a series of retaliatory measures that would lead to war. Desperate leaders on Earth called for unity, a desperate attempt to buy time as the shadows of the Jorathi fleets loomed ever closer. Yet Earth's finest minds knew the truth: humanity was not prepared for a war against the Jorathi. No one could stand against their forces in open battle. But they had a secret, something the Dominion could never predict: the will of the human spirit. And it was this very spirit that would ignite a new chapter in the galaxy's history. Under orders from Earth's highest command, a team was assembled, not just of diplomats, but of soldiers, elite operatives trained for the most dangerous of missions, led by Captain Sarah Vega, a woman whose name was whispered in fear across every battlefield. Humanity had faced her reputation as a strategist and fighter was unparalleled, and though she was known for her ruthlessness, there was more to her than the galaxy could imagine. Deep within her burned a fire that would soon ignite a reckoning for all. Captain Sarah Vega stood at the helm of the stealth cruiser Phoenix, her eyes fixed on the swirling depths of hyperspace outside the window. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound that filled the command deck, a low vibration that seemed to match the tension building in her chest. This mission was unlike any she had ever faced before. This was no routine skirmish or covert operation. This was humanity's last chance to survive the wrath of the Jorathi Dominion, and she knew the stakes were beyond anything she had ever encountered. They were venturing into the heart of enemy territory, a place where even the most advanced human warships had no hope of surviving. But there was no choice. Earth had no other option. The Jorathi had already made their move. They had wiped out Earth's communication satellites and begun to mobilize their fleets. Captain Vega's orders were clear: infiltrate the Jorathi Empire, retrieve the missing diplomats, and discover the true nature of the artifact before the Dominion could use it to wipe out humanity once and for all. The crew of the Phoenix was hand-picked, each one of them a specialist in their field. They had trained for months preparing for the impossible, and yet, as they neared Jorath Prime, the capital of the Dominion, a sense of unease filled the air. They were about to face a force far greater than anything they had ever fought, and yet the tension in the room was palpable, not from fear, but from anticipation. Each member of the team knew their role, each one knew what was at stake, and as the commander, Vega could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. "Captain, we're approaching Joreth Prime," said Lieutenant Mark Daniels, his voice calm, but strained as he read the display. "We'll be in range in 10 minutes. The stealth field is holding, but we'll need to get in close if we're going to make it through their defense grid undetected." Vega nodded, her eyes narrowing, as she reviewed the data on her console. The Jorathi were relentless, their fleet was vast, and their sensors practically omniscient. But humanity had learned to adapt and survive. It was that adaptability that had kept them alive all these years. And it was that very trait that Vega relied on now. She would lead her team into the heart of the Dominion, and they would strike from the shadows like ghosts. She would not fail. Earth could not afford failure. "Prepare for insertion," Vega ordered, her voice steady and commanding. "Everyone knows the plan. Stay sharp and move fast. We make our move once we're in the city. And don't get distracted. The artifact must be our priority." A chorus of affirmations echoed around the command deck. As the crew moved into action, the Phoenix slowed as it approached the capital city of Joreth Prime, a massive metropolis that stretched for miles, its towering spires shimmering in the dark light of the system's twin suns. The Jorathi were known for their vast and ornate cities, and Joreth Prime was no exception. The buildings were constructed from blackened metals that absorbed and reflected light in strange ways, casting an eerie glow over the entire planet's surface. As the Phoenix dropped out of hyperspace, the crew could see the defense grid flicker to life. Massive energy shields began to envelop the planet, creating a barrier that could stop anything short of a full-scale bombardment. But the Phoenix was already blending into the cityscape, its stealth systems masking its presence. The ship moved silently between the massive skyscrapers, hovering just above the surface, as if it were a shadow itself. "We're in," Vega said, her voice calm but sharp. "Landing in 5 minutes. Everyone get ready." The tension in the air shifted again. This was the point of no return. Once they touched down, there would be no going back. The Jorathi would know they were here, and the hunt would begin. But Vega was ready for whatever came next. She had fought battles on the front lines and survived wars that had decimated entire civilizations. Now, it was time to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. The Phoenix touched down with a soft thud on the cold black streets of Joreth Prime, the landing gear absorbing the impact as the ship settled into the shadows of a towering skyscraper, its sleek form barely visible against the darkened cityscape. Vega stood at the front of the landing bay, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the area outside the ship. The city was eerily silent, no sounds of activity, no movement in the streets. Just an unsettling quiet that felt wrong to the human senses. She knew the Jorathi were watching them, tracking their every move, waiting for them to slip up and give away their position. "Move out," Vega ordered, her voice low and steady, as she led her team through the airlock and into the darkened streets of the city. The rest of the team followed in tight formation, their boots making little noise as they moved through the streets, their weapons drawn but lowered, ready for anything. The streets of Joreth Prime were unlike anything Vega had ever seen. The buildings towered over them, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch for miles. The air was thick with an oppressive heat that made it hard to breathe. The city was massive, stretching beyond the horizon, and yet it felt empty, devoid of the life and energy Vega expected to find in a capital city. There were no people, no sign of movement, not even the usual sounds of traffic or commerce, just the hum of the city's power grid and the occasional flicker of distant lights. "This is off," whispered Lieutenant Daniels as he kept a watchful eye on the surroundings. "It's too quiet. We should be seeing Jorathi patrols by now." Vega nodded and signaled for the team to halt. She squatted low to the ground and studied the terrain for any signs of movement or surveillance. The last thing they wanted was to walk right into an ambush. She knew the Jorathi were calculating and cunning, but they hadn't anticipated humans being so quick on their feet. "We need to keep moving," Vega said, finally standing up. "Stay sharp and keep your heads down. We're looking for the council chambers. They'll be underground most likely. That's where the artifact will be hidden." The team pressed on, their pace quickening as they moved deeper into the heart of the city. the shadows grew longer as the light from the twin suns faded behind the massive buildings, and the temperature dropped rapidly. Vega could feel her breath catch in the cold air. But she didn't let it distract her. Her mind was focused only on the mission. The fate of humanity rested on what they would find below the surface. They approached a large plaza at the center of the city, its fountain at the center frozen in time, its waters still and dark. The ground beneath their feet was covered in strange symbols etched into the surface that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light from above. Vega couldn't make out the meaning of the symbols, but she knew enough to know they were Jorathi. She had studied their language during her training, and the ancient scripts had been burned into her memory. "Something's not right," said Corporal Liu, his voice tense as he scanned the plaza. "This place is too perfect, too clean. It doesn't feel real." Vega's instincts kicked in, and she immediately ordered her team to take cover behind a nearby column. As the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, she wasn't sure what was coming, but she could feel it. The Jorathi was setting a trap, and they had walked straight into it. Just as the team settled into position, a series of blinding lights flooded the plaza, casting long shadows across the ground, and a deep mechanical hum filled the air from all directions. The lights weren't from any normal Jorathi searchlights. They were something else, something more powerful and deadly. "Ambush!" Vega shouted as she drew her sidearm and signaled for the team to engage the enemy. From the shadows emerged a squad of Jorathi shock troops, their armored forms moving with terrifying speed and precision. They were heavily armed, and their weapons crackled with energy, ready to cut down anything that got in their way. The battle had begun. The Jorathi shock troops surged forward, their movements swift and fluid, their glowing weapons crackling with energy. As they surrounded the team, Vega didn't hesitate, her mind calculating the best course of action. Before her body had even moved, she dropped to a crouch, rolling to the left. As a bolt of energy sailed past her head, she returned fire. In an instant, her blaster's plasma shots ripping through the air and striking one of the soldiers square in the chest. The alien's armor flared with a burst of energy before it buckled under the force of the blast, and the soldier crumpled to the ground. "Stay low and keep moving," Vega barked as she rolled behind, cover her team following suit, each member of the squad moving with precision and coordination, every action calculated in response to the oncoming assault. The Jorathi were powerful, but humanity had something they didn't understand: adaptability, the ability to learn and respond in real time. Lieutenant Daniels was already firing from a concealed position, using the plaza's large statues for cover. His shots tearing through the air and taking down two of the Jorathi. As they advanced towards his position, his eyes narrowed as he scanned for his next target. There was no time to think, only to react. The Jorathi were relentless, and their firepower overwhelming. But they had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the human ability to survive against impossible odds. The Jorathi soldiers were well trained, but they had never fought humans who fought not just for victory, but for survival. Their tactics were alien and unpredictable. No alien force had ever had to face the sheer unpredictability that humans brought to combat, and it was that very unpredictability that now made them dangerous. "Cover fire," shouted Sergeant Ramos as he peeked from behind a column and fired a short burst into the advancing enemy. The Jorathi flinched back, giving Ramos the opening he needed to grab a grenade from his belt and toss it into the center of their formation. The explosion was deafening, sending debris and body parts flying in all directions. "Keep moving," Vega shouted as she dashed across the plaza to another piece of cover, her eyes darting over the battlefield to assess the situation. The Jorathi were beginning to fall back, but she knew this wasn't over. The enemy had only retreated to regroup. They were far from finished. A sharp crack of energy split the air as a Jorathi sniper took a shot from a distant rooftop. Vega felt the heat of the bolt whiz past her ear and instinctively dropped to the ground. As another shot came screaming in towards her position, she pressed her back against the stone column and motioned for her team to return fire. "Daniels, Liu, take out that sniper now," she ordered as she reached for her comms unit. "We need a distraction, and we need it fast." "On it," Lieutenant Daniels replied as he and Liu moved in perfect unison, taking cover behind the shattered statues and returning fire towards the sniper's position. across the plaza. Daniel's shots were precise and methodical, each one seeking the Jorathi sniper's weak point, while Liu kept their backs covered. The sniper fired once more, narrowly missing the edge of Daniel's shoulder, but it was enough to give Liu the opening he needed. He lined up his shot, and with a steady breath fired his plasma bolt, caught the sniper square in the chest. The Jorathi soldier's form went limp and fell from the rooftop with a sickening thud. "Snipers down," Liu reported, his voice tight, with the adrenaline coursing through him. "Good work, now move out," Vega said quickly, as she rose to her feet and signaled for the team to advance. They were only a few blocks from their objective, the entrance to the underground council chambers, where the artifact was likely hidden. But as they moved deeper into the city, the pressure was mounting. The Jorathi would be expecting them. They had already set their trap. Now they would begin to close in. Captain Ramos said, as he checked his tactical readout, "I'm seeing something strange. The area ahead, it's heavily fortified, more Jorathi troops and energy shields, at least 2 squads, maybe more." Vega clenched her jaw and glanced around at her team. They were exhausted, bloodied, but still standing. They had no choice. They were closed. They had to push through the final stretch. "We're not turning back now," she said, her voice hard with resolve. "Move out. We hit them fast and hard. If we want to reach that artifact before they know we're here, we have no time to waste." With one final nod, the team set off again toward the heart of Jorath Prime, each step bringing them closer to the unknown, each moment a reminder that the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders, and the world they fought for would never be the same again. The streets of Jorath Prime grew darker as they moved closer to their objective, the air around them thick with the scent of ozone and burnt metal. The team moved in perfect sync, each soldier watching the shadows for signs of movement. The adrenaline was wearing off and fatigue began to take hold, but there was no time for rest. The Jorathi were closing in, and they were running out of time. Ahead, the towering entrance to the council chambers loomed like a fortress. Its massive metal doors were sealed shut by energy fields that pulsed with a steady hum. Behind it, Vega could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on her. Every second felt like an eternity. The artifact was within their reach, but the closer they got, the more vulnerable they became. The Jorathi were aware of their presence now, and every step forward felt like they were walking into the jaws of a predator. Approaching the target area, Vega whispered into her comms, "Brace yourselves, we're going in hot." Her team responded with a series of affirmations, their faces hard with determination. But there was no mistaking the fear that lingered just beneath the surface, the fear of the unknown, the fear that the artifact might be gone before they could reach it, the fear that they might not survive this mission. Vega glanced over at Lieutenant Daniels, who was scanning the area through his visor. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the incoming data. The Jorathi had set up barricades near the entrance to the council chambers, and the energy shields were strong, but there was a weakness in their system, a small gap in the grid just big enough to slip through. "Everyone get into position," Vega ordered, as she moved to a small alcove near the entrance, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She didn't like the silence. It was too perfect, too still. Something was waiting for them. Sergeant Ramos crouched beside her and pulled a small device from his pack. It was a disruptor pulse emitter designed to short-circuit energy shields for a few precious seconds. He attached it to the wall and activated it with a soft click. The device hummed to life, sending a burst of electromagnetic energy into the shield. It flickered for a moment before fizzling out completely. "Now's our chance," Ramos said as he quickly moved to the side. Vega motioned for the team to follow, and they rushed toward the breach in the shield, her heart pounding in her chest. As they neared the council entrance, the massive doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing a dimly lit hallway. Beyond, the walls were covered in alien symbols, their meaning unclear, but the atmosphere was heavy with a sense of foreboding. The team moved in swiftly, their weapons raised, scanning every corner, every shadow for signs of danger. The hallway stretched out before them, disappearing into the dark depths of the complex ahead. The faint sound of something moving echoed through the corridors, a low hum that seemed to reverberate in the bones. "Stay tight and move fast," Vega ordered, as she led the team down the corridor. The walls felt alive with energy, as if the building itself was watching them. Each step felt like a challenge to their every instinct, their bodies tense and ready for whatever awaited them. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the feeling became. There was something wrong about this place. It wasn't just a Jorathi stronghold. It was something ancient, something older than the Dominion itself, something that had been here long before the Jorathi had ever set foot on this world. "This place doesn't feel right," Daniels muttered, his voice barely a whisper as they turned a corner and came to a large chamber, its walls lined with strange glowing crystals that pulsed in time with the hum of the building's power systems. Vega stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes falling on a massive stone altar. At the center of the room, the artifact sat atop it, glowing softly in the dim light. Its form seemed to shimmer and shift with an energy that defied explanation. The air around it was thick with an invisible force that made her skin crawl and the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "This is it," Vega breathed, "the artifact we've been looking for." But as she took a step forward, a voice echoed through the chamber, cold and powerful, its tone laced with contempt. "You are too late, humans." The voice reverberated from the walls as if the very structure of the building itself was speaking. "The artifact is mine now, and none of you will leave this place alive." Vega's heart skipped a beat as the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The shadows in the corners of the room began to writhe and shift as if something was awakening, something old and far more dangerous than the Jorathi. "Get ready," Vega whispered to her team as the temperature in the room dropped sharply and the lights flickered. "It's not just the Jorathi we're up against anymore." The voice echoed again through the chamber, its cold malice seeping into the air and sending a shiver down Vega's spine. It was as if the entire room was alive and watching them. The hum of the building intensified, becoming a low growl vibrating beneath their feet. The shadows in the corners seemed to twist and writhe as if alive, and something ancient stirred in the dark depths of the room, a presence older than the Jorathi or any species Vega had ever encountered. "We're not leaving without that artifact," Vega said through gritted teeth as she raised her weapon, her mind racing with options. The enemy voice was still speaking, but it had no face, no source, just an overwhelming feeling of dread that filled the room like a thick fog. She motioned to her team to spread out and cover the room, but as they moved, the shadows seemed to shift in response. Every step they took felt heavier, as if the very room was pushing back against them. A sudden movement in the corner of her vision caught her attention, and she turned just in time to see a figure step out of the darkness, its form barely discernible against the shifting shadows. It was tall and humanoid, but its outline was distorted, its features changing with every glance. Vega's eyes narrowed as she took a step back, instinctively raising her weapon at the approaching figure. But before she could fire, a chilling laugh filled the room, vibrating through the walls like a deadly song. "You are fools to think you can control it," the voice crooned, now coming from the figure itself, its shape solidifying before her eyes as it emerged fully from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The being was cloaked in a flowing black robe adorned with strange symbols, and its hands were long and skeletal. Its face was obscured by a mask that seemed to be crafted from the very shadows themselves. What are you?" Vega demanded, her voice steady but laced with caution. The air in the room felt thick with danger, like they were standing on the edge of a precipice. She had never seen anything like this before, and her instincts screamed that they were facing something far beyond the Jorathi or any known enemy. "I am the one who has watched over this artifact since the beginning of time," the figure answered, its voice a low rasp. "I am the guardian of the Nexus, a being older than the Jorathi and humanity combined. You are not the first to seek its power, and you will not be the last, but you are the first to fail so quickly." The room shook again, this time more violently, the tremors rattling the walls as the artifact atop the altar began to glow brighter, its energy surging outward, as if responding to the presence of the Guardian. Vega's grip on her weapon tightened. The artifact was clearly the source of this power, but the Guardian was something else entirely, something tied to the very fabric of the Nexus itself. And it was clear now that the stakes were far higher than just Earth or the Jorathi. "We don't need to control it," Vega said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "We just need to stop it from falling into the wrong hands." The Guardian's laughter echoed again, this time more mocking. You think you can stop the inevitable foolish human, the Nexus will not be denied, and neither will I. It raised its hand, and the temperature in the room plummeted, a cold wave that swept across the chamber like an icy gust that cut through their very bones. The shadows deepened as the room itself seemed to warp and twist with the surge of energy. Fire! Vega shouted, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. Her team didn't hesitate. They opened fire in unison, the plasma bolts streaking through the air towards the Guardian, but the shots didn't seem to reach their target. Instead, they fizzled out before they could make contact with the figure. It wasn't that the Guardian was dodging or deflecting the shots. It was as if the very air around it was alive and blocking the attack with an unseen force. The Guardian extended its hand, and with a sudden snap, the air around Vega's team seemed to crackle with energy. A pulse shot outward, throwing them back against the walls with brutal force, their bodies crashing against the hard stone surfaces. As the chamber shook again, a ripple of power coursing through the ground. "Is this what you call resistance?" the Guardian mocked as it stepped closer, its eyes burning with an eerie light. "You are nothing but ants in the presence of the Nexus." Vega struggled to her feet, her vision swimming. As the aftereffects of the blast faded, she could hear her team groaning as they began to recover. But she knew they couldn't keep going like this. They were up against something far beyond them, something they couldn't fight with weapons alone. She looked to the artifact again, its glow more intense now, as if it was awakening something even more powerful, something that could reshape the galaxy itself. And as her eyes locked on it, she realized something that made her blood run cold. The Nexus wasn't just a weapon, it was a doorway, and the Guardian wasn't just a protector, it was a keyholder. "You're not protecting it," Vega said, as she found her voice again, her eyes narrowing on the Guardian. "You're trying to open it." The Guardian's laugh returned louder now as it nodded slowly. "And you will never stop it." The room felt like it was closing in around them, the Guardian's presence overwhelming every inch of the chamber, as the energy from the artifact pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to beat in time with their hearts. Vega could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on her shoulders. The Nexus wasn't just a power source, it was a link to something far greater, a force that could reshape not just this galaxy, but every galaxy within reach, and the Guardian wasn't merely guarding it, it was trying to awaken it, something that had been dormant for millennia. And now the Jorathi and humanity were both pawns in a game far beyond their understanding. Vega's mind raced. She could feel her team regrouping behind her. Though they were battered, the fire in their eyes hadn't gone out yet, but they knew the odds were slipping away. They couldn't defeat this Guardian with conventional weapons, they couldn't even seem to harm it, but the Nexus was the key to everything. And it was clear that if they didn't stop it, humanity wouldn't just lose this battle, they'd lose everything. "Listen to me," Vega said, her voice cutting through the chaotic energy in the room. "We don't fight this with strength, we fight it with knowledge. We have to understand what we're dealing with before we can stop it." Sergeant Ramos grunted as he stood up, holding his side, but nodded. "What's the plan, Captain?" Vega's mind was still focused on the Guardian, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light as it stood before them with an almost amused expression. She wasn't sure how much time they had left, but she knew they had to act fast. She turned her attention to the artifact. Its energy was seeping into the room like a living thing, each pulse making the air crackle with power, and the ground beneath them tremble. "The Guardian said it's a doorway," Vega said slowly as she looked back at her team. "If it's opening something, we need to find a way to close it, or at least stop the process. We don't know what's on the other side, but it's not something we can let out. We don't even know how to stop it," Lieutenant Daniels said, his voice laced with frustration. "We can't touch the Guardian, and we can't get close to the artifact without getting fried." "I know," Vega replied, "but we don't need to touch it, we just need to understand how it works." She turned toward the altar, once more its glow pulsing in sync with the Guardian's words, and the growing tension in the air. "There has to be something here, something we're missing." As she stepped forward, the ground shifted beneath her feet, the room seemed to lurch, and for a moment she almost lost her balance. The energy in the chamber was becoming unstable, and the Guardian's grin widened as it raised a hand. "Foolish human, you cannot stop what is coming. You should have never come here to begin with." Vega's eyes narrowed. She wasn't going to let the Guardian get to her. The stakes were too high, they couldn't afford to lose focus. We need to disable the artifact somehow, she said aloud to herself as much as to her team. There must be a mechanism, something to control its power. Without thinking, she moved toward the altar again, her steps quick and purposeful, her team following close behind. Though they were still cautious, the Guardian hadn't moved, but the air around it crackled with energy, as if it was ready to strike at any moment. Vega's mind was focused solely on the artifact, her hand reaching out toward the shimmering object at the center of the altar. The closer she got, the more the room seemed to pulse and shift with the force of its power. "Captain, don't!" Lieutenant Daniels shouted, but it was too late. Her hand brushed against the surface of the artifact, and a jolt of raw energy shot through her body, her muscles locking up. As she felt herself lifted off the ground, a room seemed to stretch around her, as she was pulled into a vision, something beyond time and space, beyond anything she had ever experienced. It was a flood of images and sensations, an endless tide of stars, galaxies, civilizations, rising and falling, the shape of the universe itself changing before her eyes. She could see it now. The Nexus wasn't just a power, it was a living force, a consciousness that had shaped everything, and the Guardian wasn't just its keeper, it was its conduit, its connection to the outside world, to whatever lay beyond this universe. And as the vision flooded her mind, she realized something terrible. The Nexus wasn't just a doorway to other worlds, it was a beacon calling something toward them, something vast and powerful. And it was coming. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she was thrown back to the present. The energy surge had released its grip, but the room had changed. The Guardian's expression had shifted from amusement to something darker, something knowing. "You understand now, don't you, human?" the voice said with a cold satisfaction. "The Nexus is not just a key, it is a signal, and the answer is already on its way." Vega stumbled to her feet, her heart pounding, as she stared at the Guardian. Who is coming?" she asked, her voice hoarse. The Guardian smiled. "The true masters of the Nexus are already on their way, and you will not stop them." Vega's heart raced as she took a step back, her mind reeling from the flood of images the Nexus had shown her, and the chilling revelation that the true masters of this place were not just a distant threat, but something far more imminent, something already on its way. She could feel the weight of their arrival bearing down on her, the air thick with an almost tangible sense of impending doom. The Guardian's words echoed in her mind louder than ever. "The true masters of the Nexus are already on their way, and you will not stop them." She swallowed hard, her mind desperately trying to make sense of it all, her breath coming in sharp gasps as the room seemed to warp around her, the walls pulsing with the energy of the artifact, every beat of its rhythm vibrating through her body. It was as if the entire chamber had become a living entity, its pulse matching her own heart's frantic pounding. "Captain," Lieutenant Daniels's voice broke through her haze of panic. "What's happening? What did you see?" Vega didn't answer right away, her mind struggling to find the words to explain what she had felt, what she had seen. The vision had been overwhelming. She had glimpsed the vastness of the universe through the Nexus's eyes. And it wasn't just the Jorothi or humanity that were insignificant, it was everything. The Nexus was a living force older than time itself, and it was a signal calling to something far greater, something outside their comprehension. I've heard no," Vega said finally, her voice shaking. "But it's bad, Daniels, it's worse than we imagined." She turned to look at the Guardian, whose glowing eyes were still locked on her with that same cold, knowing expression. "The Nexus isn't just a weapon or a doorway, it's a beacon, it's calling something toward us, and whatever it is, it's coming." The Guardian chuckled softly as it took a step forward, its cloak swirling around it like a dark cloud. "You are beginning to understand. But it is too late. The masters of the Nexus will soon arrive, and you will all be nothing before them." "Who are they?" Vega demanded, her voice raw. "What do they want with Earth? What do they want with us?" The Guardian tilted its head slightly as if amused by the question. "They are the architects of reality itself," it said slowly. "They have shaped the course of time and space. They have seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. And they are the ones who created the Nexus to guide all things toward their design." It raised a hand and gestured to the artifact. "The Nexus is merely a tool for their will, a way to communicate across dimensions, a way to call their kind into this reality." The air in the room grew colder as the Guardian's words sank in. Vega felt the ground beneath her feet tremble again, and she realized that the Nexus was not just a device of power, it was a threshold, something that would allow these beings to cross into their world. And once they arrived, there would be no stopping them. Humanity would be nothing in their eyes, a blip in the grand design of the universe. "Why are you helping them?" Vega asked through gritted teeth. "Why protect this thing if it means the end of everything?" The Guardian's expression darkened, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Because I am bound to it," it replied coldly. "I was created to protect the Nexus, not for my will, but for theirs. And I have fulfilled my purpose. Now the Masters will come, and I will have no choice but to bow before them, as you will." Vega's mind raced as she tried to process the enormity of what the Guardian was saying. There was no way to stop this, no way to fight against something so vast, so incomprehensible. It was beyond anything she had ever faced, beyond anything humanity had ever known.